On the 9th of January 2008, Sophie Elliott was excited and getting ready for a new stage in her life. She had recently ended an on and off again relationship with her abusive boyfriend, Clayton Weatherston, and she was looking forwards to a free and happy future. She was packing up her life in her bedroom as she had just gotten her dream job 500 miles away and was due to leave shortly. But her ex-boyfriend Clayton wouldn't let this happen. He turned up at her house unannounced and stabbed her 216 times, killing her violently and mutilating her body.
Why did you cut parts of both her ears off?
I don't know.
Is it just a coincidence? They're all features of attractiveness.
Well, my personal view of attractiveness is that those features are not important. I suppose it's how they correlate with one another and are they aligned and everything else. You can't just have nice ears and, it's the whole package. So, and that's generically, she was attractive.
Why did you cut the nipple off her breast?
Don't know.
Stab her in both eyes?
I don't know.
When police arrived at the scene and asked him why he had killed her, Clayton calmly responded, "Because of the emotional pain she has caused me over the past year." Clayton did not resist arrest, but at the trial, he pleaded not guilty to murder, but admitted to manslaughter, claiming Sophie had provoked him into stabbing her. Was this true? Had Sophie attacked Clayton first? Or was this narcissistic monster lying through his teeth and painting his girlfriend in a bad light?
I can't believe we are talking about this.
Big drop.
It's really scraping the barrel.
Big drop, Jim.
I'm sorry, I just had to do that.
Sophie Kate Elliott was born on the 11th of June 1985 to her parents Gil and Leslie Elliott. She had two older brothers, Chris, who was 7 years older than her, and Nick, who was 11 years older, and the whole family lived happily together in the city of Dunedin in New Zealand. Her school friends said Sophie was their little diamond and described her as a girl with talent and an infectious personality. Her father, Gil, said she was a strong-willed, popular woman who was very helpful and loving. When Sophie was 11, her oldest brother Nick moved to Australia and was followed a year later by her other brother, Chris. As Sophie's father, Gil, travelled often for work, this meant that Sophie and her mother Leslie were left alone together a lot of the time, which led the pair to develop a very deep bond and become incredibly close. Leslie described their relationship as more than just mother and daughter. They were best friends. Sophie's mother Leslie said Sophie was a real girly girl, even from a young age. She loved to express herself through the arts and began ballet at just 4 years old. Sophie played the piano, loved music and drama, and developed an interest in photography.
She loved the simple things of life, and she seemed to see things in nature that perhaps we don't stop and take notice of.
Sophie was an incredibly diligent and intelligent student. She worked hard at school, and as a result, she graduated from St. Hilda's Collegiate School with an award, as she was the second highest ranking student in the school. Her former principal at high school described Sophie as the quintessential St. Hilda's girl with twinkling eyes and a drive that would see her achieve great things. Her school friends, Lindsay and Jess, said she excelled both academically and culturally. Jess said she loved her friends and she loved her life, and she was so looking forward to going to Wellington. She loved everything she did. When Sophie graduated, she went on to study economics at the University of Otago, where she performed exceptionally well. Her mother Leslie said she did well at university. She got A+ all the way through and got a first-class honours degree in economics. In the last year of her degree, however, in 2007, sometime around her 22nd birthday, Sophie's path tragically crossed with a horrible and narcissistic man. One evening she was working late at the university and was approached by one of her tutors, 33-year-old economics supervisor Clayton Weatherston. Clayton proceeded to ask her if she wanted to have dinner with him, and Sophie accepted. Clayton Robert Weatherston was born on the 9th of January 1976 in Dunedin and grew up in Green Island with his parents and 2 siblings. According to his mother, Clayton was said to be an anxious and tense child. He found any new activity or change, such as starting school or leaving home, stressful. At Green Island Primary School, Clayton quickly became, in his own words, a big fish in a small pond. Clayton was extremely academically able by the age of 6 and was already reading at the level of a 12 to 14-year-old. As a child, he had problems with bedwetting and he had extremely poor eyesight. Clayton refused to wear his glasses as he was terrified of being teased, saying,
I was just terrified. I was terrified of being teased. Now glasses are fashionable, but not back then. It was a source of differentiation and possibly derision from other people.
Clayton's chronic anxiety continued to impact his life into adolescence. His obsessiveness and arrogance also started to show more and more as he approached the end of high school. He set extremely high standards for himself and worked furiously to achieve them, letting extracurricular activities slide as he aimed for the best academic results. Through his hard work and determination, he got high grades and finished top of his year in all but one subject, but this was never enough for Clayton. This obsessive quest for perfection in academia only intensified when Clayton started studying a Bachelor of Commerce at Otago University in 1994. His extreme anxiety before exams and an obsession to achieve perfect grades became a hallmark of his 13-year university career. Clayton would often drop a class or pull out a paper if he thought he wouldn't get anything less than an A+ grade. During internal assessments, he achieved perfect A+ grades, but when it came time to sit the exams themselves at the end of the semester, his extreme anxiety took over and he ended up vomiting before exams. Clayton said, "I just put a lot of pressure on myself. It was pretty straightforward, of course, and I was over-analyzing it." Eventually, Clayton decided to visit the Otago University Student Health Centre for the first time to discuss his anxiety and lack of resilience during stress, and he managed to get a medical certificate which allowed him to resit the exams. Clayton was also prescribed Prozac, an antidepressant, which is commonly used to treat anxiety and panic disorder. Finally, 6 years after starting his studies, in the year 2000, Clayton graduated and immediately began pursuing a postgraduate in economics. In 2003, Clayton began work at the Treasury in Wellington, but just 9 months later, he returned to Dunedin much earlier than expected, claiming it was due to his ongoing bout of glandular fever. But rumour has it that Clayton was not actually liked or a popular person during his brief time at the Treasury. In May of 2004, Clayton began a new relationship with a woman who has been kept anonymous. She spoke of Clayton saying, "He had a loving, generous side and a nasty and mean demeanour on the other. The private side was a fairly insecure person and someone who could be very mean and someone that got very worked up very easily and wouldn't be able to get over those things."
He at times could have a very nasty mean streak, and he did it on various occasions, say fairly demeaning things to me.
In late 2006, their romantic relationship ended following an incident where Clayton lost it with his girlfriend, kicking her and jumping on her, causing her nose to bleed.
And he kicked me in the back and in the ribs, and then I travelled across the floor, and next thing I knew he jumped on the back of my neck.
A couple years earlier, Clayton had bought his own property, and when his scholarship money from his PhD studies had started to run out, he secured work as a tutor at the University of Otago in the economics department. In mid-2007, Clayton was working late in his office and had started feeling peckish. He found one of his female students also working late, 22-year-old Sophie Elliott, and so Clayton asked if she wanted to join him for dinner, and she accepted. By July 2007, Clayton and Sophie started dating, but their 5-month on and off again relationship was far from perfect. Just 3 weeks into their relationship, Sophie expressed concerns to her mother, and Leslie said, She used to complain that he would never answer text messages, was often late for date arrangements, not ringing her when he said he would, that kind of thing. He liked to drink and socialized, yet the odd thing was, he seldom ever asked Sophie to join in much of his socializing. Yet he expected her to pick him up from various events. Often she didn't hear from him for days, and when she did, it was Sophie who had to fit in with his arrangements. As I said to Sophie, not a good start to a relationship. Clayton, on the other hand, thought very highly of himself, and he reckoned Sophie was obsessed with him, and said he was flattered by it. Sophie, however, was 11 years younger than Clayton, and at 22 years old, Sophie's eagerness and naivety in their relationship may have come across as obsession to Clayton. One of Clayton's former friends said Clayton built an empire around himself during 2007, where he saw himself as the king. During their relationship, Clayton and Sophie argued regularly, and one of the sources for the arguments came from Clayton's constant need for reassurance about his sexual performance. In particular, he asked her how he ranked in comparison to previous lovers, as well as the size of his penis compared to her previous partners. Was he number one? The persistent conflict reached its climax when a frustrated Sophie relented and admitted he wasn't.
I said, how big was his sexual organ?
You asked her about the size of this man's penis, is that right?
I think I was after an ego boost for me. And insecurity.
Did you get the boost you were after?
No, not at all. The way in which it was said. But I mean, I asked for it. Well, I told you what the response was, right?
Quickly into their relationship, Sophie, once a remarkably confident young woman, started lacking in self-esteem. Clayton started attacking Sophie's self-esteem and self-worth, often criticizing her and giving her hurtful put-downs. Clayton would call Sophie fat and ugly, and Sophie would go to her mother and say, "If I lost a bit of weight, he'd like me more." He told her she had an ugly chin, her eyes were too far apart, and he went into specific details about areas of her body, something she naturally found very upsetting.
He listed each thing individually. He told her to look at how disgusting she was. He mentioned her breasts, her stomach, her bum, and her hair. He said that her chin was too pointy, her eyes were too far apart.
Sophie, however, did not let her relationship with Clayton ruin the chances of her future career. In mid-2007, she travelled to Wellington and secured a position in the Treasury's graduate programme, which was due to start in January 2008. This was the same Treasury where Clayton had failed to hold down his job a few years back. Clayton became incredibly jealous and began threatening to ruin Sophie's career by saying he would use his contacts at the Treasury and talk to them. Over the next 5 months, the couple would regularly break up and get back together again, until it finally ended sometime in November of 2007. With the relationship finally being over, Sophie and Clayton were able to move on with their lives. Sophie's exams were finished and she was finally going to graduate, and with a couple of months before her big move to Wellington, she went on holiday with her best friend Jess. Clayton went on and finished his PhD, becoming Dr. Weatherston, shortly before Christmas. On the 15th of December 2007, Clayton threw a party to celebrate the completion of his PhD, and Sophie attended as a friend and took pictures of the event. Being the friendly and caring person she was, Sophie put together a photo album with the pictures from the party, and she plans to give it to Clayton as a late Christmas present. So she went over to his house on the 27th of December to give it to him. However, Sophie later came home very upset, and she told her mother what had happened. Leslie describes the incident saying, "He invited her to sit next to him and talk about where they were going. At that point, he began to get amorous. Sophie had no intention of having any further romantic attachment with him and asked him to leave it at that. He then suggested they go to the bedroom, and she responded by saying, 'You're not getting the message, this is over.' As she stood to leave, his mood suddenly changed. He picked her up, carried her to his bedroom, and threw her roughly onto the bed. Sophie began to scream, and Weatherston straddled her and put one arm across her throat and a hand over her mouth. As they struggled, he began to abuse her with words like whore and slut. In the struggle, he lost his grip and Sophie was able to get free and run to her car. He followed, opened the car door and screamed, "When you were flying back from Australia, I hoped the plane would crash so you would be killed." Sophie also wrote in her diary what had happened that day. "Lord, I hardly know where to start. Clayton assaulted me. When I went to leave, he was absolutely psycho. No exaggeration at all, I assure you. He told me I'm a horrible person. Everyone hates me. I'm ugly. He has never liked me, etc., while pinning me down with his entire body on his bed." Sophie further wrote that Clayton had put his forearm across her throat and put his hand over her mouth to stop people from hearing her yelling at him to get off her. She wrote, "I confess, I was very scared and panicky. I've never had a guy use his weight against me like that. I knew he was furious and extremely unreasonable." Following that incident, on the 7th of January, Sophie went to Clayton's office in the Commerce building to challenge him, but he denied anything had happened and said people would think she was crazy if she said anything, and that he'd been telling other people that she had psychological issues. The following day, on the 8th of January 2008, friends said that Clayton spent all day venting to them about Sophie. The day after that, on the 9th of January, it was Clayton's 32nd birthday. Apparently, he had spent the morning obsessing over Sophie's social media accounts, and so he decided to go over to her house unannounced. On the 9th of January 2008, Clayton arrived at the Elliott's family home around 12:30 p.m. Sophie's mother, Leslie, answered the door, and Clayton told her he had a farewell present for Sophie, saying, "Is Sophie in? I have something for her." Sophie asked her mother from upstairs who was at the door, and Leslie let her know it was Clayton. Sophie shrugged her shoulders and raised her eyes to the ceiling and told her mother to let him in. Sophie let Clayton know that she was really busy and running late as she was packing up her things, getting ready for her move. So if he wanted to talk to her, it would have to be in her room while she continued packing. Sophie and Clayton went upstairs to her bedroom, but shortly afterwards, Sophie came back down and told her mother, Leslie, "I don't know what he wants. He's just sitting there, not saying a word." Leslie told Sophie to just get rid of him, as she had lots more packing to do, so Sophie went back upstairs to her bedroom. A short time later, Leslie heard her daughter screaming, "Don't, Clayton, don't, Clayton." Leslie immediately ran upstairs, straight to Sophie's bedroom, but the door was shut closed. Leslie kicked and belted at the door and told him to open it, but he didn't.
I raced upstairs at the first scream, and she just started screaming and screaming and screaming. And I belted on the door. I tried the door and it was locked. I kicked the door and belted it and screamed at Clayton to open it, but he didn't.
She raced back downstairs to grab her phone and dialed 111. She grabbed a meat skewer and rushed back upstairs, all whilst she heard Sophie screaming from her bedroom. She then heard a rhythmic thump and she assumed Clayton was assaulting her. Leslie finally managed to get the door open using the meat skewer. Inside the room, she saw poor Sophie lying on the floor and she instantly knew she was dead. Clayton was still standing over her, stabbing her violently in the chest. Not pausing, he continued stabbing Sophie with his right hand whilst trying to push the door closed with his left, and he never said a word. Leslie was still on the phone to the operator at the time, and she screamed, "He's killed her!" The operator on the line told her to leave the house immediately, and as hard as it must have been for Leslie, Leslie knew it was too late for her daughter and she had to save herself, so she left the house. She ran to the end of the drive and collapsed to the ground.
I don't know why he didn't kill me. He could have quite easily. I wouldn't have had a hope. He was over 6 foot and he was quite a big guy. But he just shut the door, and I think that he knew that he'd probably cause more stress by letting me live than letting me die.
Police officer Constable John Cunningham was the first officer on the scene, and when he got to Sophie's bedroom, the door was locked again. Officer Cunningham shouted that he would kick the door in, but then he heard the door being unlocked, and there he saw Clayton standing at the end of the bed next to Sophie, who was lying dead, covered in blood on the floor. Cunningham asked Clayton what he had done, and Clayton just responded, "I killed her." Cunningham said that Clayton was lucid, coherent, calm and not agitated, saying it appeared that he was not shaking or similar. He was in a normal state, in control of himself. He was just standing with his hands by his sides. I then asked him, "Why did you kill her?" He replied, "The emotional pain she has caused me over the past year." Cunningham then asked Clayton what he had killed her with, and Clayton said a knife. Cunningham then asked where the knife was, and Clayton said, probably under her. Cunningham then pointed at a pair of scissors he saw between Sophie's legs, and asked Clayton about them, to which he replied, "I used them at the end." Cunningham then took Clayton outside, and when Cunningham asked whose blood was smeared all over his arms, legs and face, Clayton replied, "A little bit mine, mostly hers." Cunningham asked Clayton who he had killed, and Clayton said, "It is Sophie Kate Elliott, 11th of June, 1985. Clayton was immediately arrested and taken into custody. Forensic pathologist Martin Sage performed the autopsy the next day and found that Sophie Elliott had died from blood loss. 2 wounds had pierced her heart and 1 lung, with other wounds to her neck and throat, severing the main artery and major vein. In total, she received 216 separate injuries, mostly stab wounds from a knife blade, with some inflicted by scissors. Additionally, there were 7 blunt force injuries and some defensive wounds, and the pathologist concluded that Clayton attacked targeted aspects of beauty, and these attacks were intended to disfigure her.
Why did you cut parts of both her ears off?
I don't know.
Is it just a coincidence? They're all features of attractiveness.
Well, my personal view of attractiveness is that those features are not important. I suppose it's how they correlate with one another and are they aligned and everything else. You can't just have nice ears and, it's the whole package. So, and that's generically, she was attractive.
Why did you cut the nipple off her breast?
I don't know.
Stab her in both eyes?
I don't know.
Her eyes were closed, but they appeared to have received multiple cut injuries. Clumps of her hair had also been cut off, and parts of her nose and her right ear had been removed. Dr. Sage said Sophie's body showed signs of a persistent, focused and determined attack. There were also 11 wounds to her left breast, and one of her nipples had been cut off.
I suppose the thing that gets to me the most is that he desecrated her body after he killed her, and that really riles me. And there's a law against desecrating a human body, and she didn't get in it. Well, to all intents and purposes, she didn't get anything for that.
Leslie Elliott later wrote about Sophie's injuries in her book, saying, "After she was dead, and God, how we have hoped and prayed she was dead, he defiled her by cutting off her ears and nose, a nipple from her breast, and parts round her genital area. As a final indignity, he cut off some of her hair and laid it across her face. Sophie had beautiful long hair. Why he did this, only he will know." Clayton Weatherston's trial was scheduled to start on the 22nd of June 2009, and he pleaded not guilty to murder, but said he was guilty to manslaughter. In a move which caused controversy and a national debate, Clayton claimed he was provoked into killing Sophie, and he attempted to paint Sophie as the villain. Clayton and his lawyers tried to portray Sophie as promiscuous and a psycho girlfriend, and they said that Clayton's unique personality meant he was ill-equipped to deal with it all.
Sophie was called the psycho girlfriend. He asked me if he should be tested for an STD because he had said that Sophie had slept with another man in Australia.
He thought she had a borderline personality disorder.
Yes, he actually said that a few times during the conversation.
Sophie got very drunk one night and ended up in bed with a person called
Yes.
And Sophie met up with a Dutch person, I think he's been described as Danish. And you're aware that that encounter was also involved sexual intercourse taking place?
Yes.
And you're aware that that developed into a sexual relationship?
Yes.
Was married?
Yes.
They portrayed Clayton as a complicated yet troubled individual who had multiple layers of self-esteem issues and a crippling personality disorder. During his trial, Clayton even took to the stand in an effort to express his own insecurities to the court, something which is usually heavily advised against. Clayton's want to take the stand just highlighted further his wants to control every aspect of his life, and his cockiness into thinking he could manipulate the jury.
You remember doing all those things, I suggest?
I don't. I would have, and evidence-in-chief told you everything I did.
Because you would tell the truth if you remembered it.
Absolutely.
You remembered where the knife was when the officer asked you? You remember that, don't you? You were able to convey that straight away.
I had some time before the officer came into the room, but Mr. Bates...
Go looking for the knife.
No, please.
You'd have to tell me specifically what I said in order for your question to say that I recalled.
Did you remember that where the knife was or not? How's your memory on that? Let's.
I knew it was in the area around Sophie, but if you could recall the comment that I made to the officer that justifies the question, and then we'll go from there.
Plenty of time. We'll do that when we come to that
Cool.
day.
Clayton was represented by Judith Alblet-Kerr, and as mentioned previously, they argued a defense of provocation, arguing that Clayton had been provoked by the emotional pain of a tumultuous 6-month relationship with Sophie, and because she had apparently attacked him with a pair of scissors first, and Clayton had responded, losing self-control. The defense opened their case and argued that manslaughter was the proper charge for Clayton Weatherston. The defense said, "We all know who committed this act, and that is the accused, Dr. Clayton Weatherston. The issue for you in this trial is, was Dr. Weatherston a cold-blooded killer, or was he a man who, as a result of provocation, had lost the power of self-control when he committed this terrible act? Because it is a terrible act." Clayton told the court that on the day of his 32nd birthday, he had arranged to meet his mother that afternoon and then hang out with friends that night. He first, however, wanted to find Sophie with the intention of returning gifts Sophie had given to him back to her. He said when he drove from the university to Sophie's home, he parked his car and walked up the driveway, carrying a plastic bag with the gifts in it and his laptop bag over his shoulder. He said he took the laptop bag with him because he didn't want to leave it in the car, and inside his laptop bag, he had a knife. He told the High Court that he carried a knife pretty much always for protection and for cutting up fruit when he ate at the university. He said, "I had carried it for some time around university campus. I was concerned about my personal safety. I used it, though, for eating things in my office, but I would carry it from time to time, just like a pocket knife. I was concerned about being jumped. Campus security can't be there all the time." He explained there were assaults on campus all the time, and that he would often walk through campus late at night. He carried on by saying that when he was in the bedroom with Sophie, he ended up attacking her because Sophie apparently lost her temper, pulled out the scissors, and attacked him first, provoking Clayton to lose his temper.
The deceased, no doubt, at her wit's end also with the course of the relationship, screamed out to him, "You, Clayton," lunged at him with a pair of scissors, and in the process knocked off his glasses, leaving him exposed and vulnerable.
Clayton came across as cocky and rude on the stand, and it was clear to everyone that he thought himself superior and more intelligent than everyone.
So I don't like being in a position where I can't answer questions. I'd rather know all the answers and be able to provide you with them rather than have such a degree of cynicism about my recall. Were you not listening, Mr. Bates? Are you lying, Mr. Bates? I can't believe we are talking about this.
Big drop.
You're really scraping the barrel.
Big drop down.
I'm sorry, I just had to do that.
The prosecution, on the other hand, fought hard. They would have to prove, beyond reasonable doubt, that Clayton Weatherston acted without provocation. Crown Prosecutor Marie Grills opened the murder case against Clayton, saying that he set about killing and disfiguring Sophie Elliott in a calm and collected manner. They said that he took the knife with him. Marie Grills said, "It is the Crown case that the accused, for whatever reason, decided to kill and disfigure Sophie Elliott, and he did so in a calm and collected manner, with a significant degree of premeditation." They mentioned how he had taken the knife with him when he went to visit Sophie Elliott. She then went on to mention the horrific state in which Sophie's body was found, explaining the clusters of wounds found all over her body, saying her nose had been cut off in a symmetrical fashion as well as chunks of her hair. She said there were clusters of wounds up to 45 in number on other sensitive parts of her body. She said, "The Crown says it is no coincidence that some of these clusters of wounds relates to areas of physical beauty." She went on to explain how the police had arrived at the house 7 minutes after Leslie had called 111, and how Clayton had confessed on the scene directly to the officer that he had killed Sophie Kate Elliott. The court were told about the pair's tumultuous on and off again relationship, and they mentioned the previous earlier violent incident that had happened on the 27th of December 2007. Finally, they explained how Clayton had wished her dead because he believed she had ruined his chances of getting a permanent lecturer's position he had applied for at the university, and how he was jealous of Sophie's success and her future at the Treasury.
Robert Alexander was Sophie Elliott's supervisor at Otago University's economics department. He also worked with her boyfriend and lecturer, Clayton Weatherston.
Well, he clearly regarded himself very highly.
Alexander didn't agree.
He was someone who had gone considerably down in my academic estimation after I read his thesis, was intent on causing a lot of trouble by his difficult attitude with people.
Weatherston had asked Alexander what he thought his chances were of getting the lectureship he'd applied for.
It was my opinion that he had little chance based on his conflict with other members of the department, particularly in accusing 2 senior colleagues of plagiarism.
After a 5-week trial, the jury returned with a verdict, and on the 22nd of July, Clayton Weatherston was found guilty of Sophie Elliott's murder, and on the 15th of September, Justice Judith Potter sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 18 years. Justice Judith Potter rejected the defense that Clayton was provoked, saying she believed the killing was deliberate and controlled. She rejected the claims of provocation, saying, "The Crown says there were no words or acts that amounted to provocation, nor was there any loss of self-control by the accused." She also rejected Clayton's evidence that he usually carried the knife with him for his own protection, and she took into account the continued attack and mutilation of Sophie Elliott's body after her death. As Judge Judith Potter handed down the sentence to Clayton, she said Sophie Elliott's death was a tragedy in every sense of the word, adding, "I am in no doubt this murder was committed with a high level of brutality and callousness." As Clayton was sentenced, the courtroom was very subdued and no one cried. Sophie's mother, Leslie Elliott, immediately broke down, however, after the verdict was delivered. She embraced her husband, Gil, and then remarkably with the defense counsel, Judith Albert Kerr. Clayton, however, showed little emotion in the dock, and his face just twitched. Sophie's family said in a statement that the 5-week trial had been painful. It has not been easy to sit daily in court and listen not only to graphic forensic evidence, but also to distortions and embellishments of the truth about Sophie and her life. We have had no choice but to sit and watch it unfold and hope for the best, whilst he is allowed to talk and pass notes to his legal team anytime he wants. Our lives will never be the same, but we are fortunate to have the unwavering support of family and friends. They have been our strength. The crime and the trial were covered extensively in the news media and contributed to the government abolishing the partial defense of provocation in cases of murder. The justice system failed Sophie Elliott, allowing her killer to drag her name through the mud and painted her in a bad light, and allowed Clayton to continue to persecute Sophie and her family after her death.
Friends of murder-accused Clayton Weatherston called Sophie Elliott his psycho girlfriend.
Just days after killing her, he wrote a letter saying she was a horrible person.
An ex-girlfriend reading from a letter Clayton Weatherston wrote her from prison.
I am also sorry that such a horrible person has been glorified in the media. That is our society. a sad face.
He's talking about Sophie Elliott. The letter dated just 5 days after he stabbed the 22-year-old to death.
Women's Refuge Chief Executive said, "The provocation defence is based on absolutely archaic notions about violence. Once upon a time, society accepted that an affront to male privilege or dignity was a reasonable excuse to fly into a homicidal rage. This trial turns justice inside out. The killer became the victim, and Sophie Elliott was portrayed to us all as he chose to describe her. Unfortunately for Clayton Weatherston, the jury didn't buy it, and nor did the hundreds or thousands of New Zealanders who watched him giggling on television." Counselling Agency Relationship Services said that the case was a reminder that extreme partner violence could occur in all sectors of society and was not restricted to couples who lived together, saying, "This is a well-educated, articulate man who has resorted to violence on a number of occasions in response to relationship pressures." The agency said people who knew someone at risk from a partner should encourage that person to seek help. Warning signs in a relationship include possessiveness, jealousy, stalking and controlling behaviour. People need to be aware these are not part of a normal, healthy relationship and should take action. On the 6th of October 2010, the Sophie Elliott Foundation was launched. The aim of the foundation was to warn and educate young women of the signs of an abusive relationship. Their main aim was to raise money to fund a nationwide primary prevention program and to support local community initiatives which aligned with the foundation.
The biggest message I want to get out there is to young people that it's not okay to abuse, and that's guys and girls. And I want to acknowledge that we know that boys do get abused as well. It always sounds like it's a bit of boy bashing, but it's not at all. So that the message from Sophie's story, and as people know that she died at the hands of an abuser, that is that it's not okay, and if you see something going on, to either talk to the person that's being abused or talk to somebody that might be able to help them to see it, because often when they're in a relationship they can't always see what's going on. Need somebody from outside to sort of look in and say, hey, this is not okay, sort of thing.
After years of hard work, Leslie Elliott closed the Sophie Elliott Foundation in 2019, stating that her Parkinson's disease prevented her from continuing to run the foundation and that she did not want another person controlling her daughter's image.
I want to pay tribute to the work you've done over the past decade or so. Leslie, can we start with you? Why are you winding the foundation up?
There's a lot of reasons we're doing this. It's not easy. Well, it wasn't an easy decision to make, but the reality is that we are now 10 years older, 11 years older, and it takes its toll after a while. We've travelled the length and breadth of New Zealand, and it's been great while we were doing it, but now we realise that time is moving on, and we are getting a bit tired, and it's time for other people to take over. And the New Zealand Police have been with us all the way as well, because it was what they wanted to do was bring in some sort of education program into schools. And so we just felt when we sat down and analysed it all that this really is the time that we've achieved what I wanted to achieve, and that was when my daughter was murdered. I realised that her relationship had been an abusive one. What I wanted to do was go and talk to young girls at girls' schools and tell them about Sophie's relationship and the things that we missed in that relationship.
On the 10th of June 2011, Leslie Elliott launched the book Sophie Elliott, A Mother's Story of Her Family's Loss and Their Quest for Change, to present her side of the story while warning young women of the dangers of domestic violence. During the trial, the call Leslie had made to the 111 operator was not allowed to be used as evidence in court, as Leslie Elliott was described as an unreliable witness. So through this book, she wanted to share her side of the story. Leslie said, "If the book could save one life, then that would be really good, but I think it will do much more than that. That's my feeling. We know that there's never going to be a wedding, there's never going to be a son-in-law, and there's never going to be any grandchildren from her. The death of a child potentially wipes out, when you think about it, generations of people. It's difficult to know what to do with birthdays and what to do with Christmases and all that sort of stuff when you're used to having someone around who's not there anymore." The book also claimed that Clayton had been found to have accessed and downloaded pornography hours and hours on end using the university's computers, but this was not allowed to be used at trial. Sophie's father, Gil, also wrote some loving words towards his daughter in the book. Sophie was the most beautiful, caring and loving daughter and sister any parent or sibling could ever want. She was the light of our life, and when she was so cruelly taken, that light went out and an awful darkness descended. Sophie was one of life's genuine treasures. I believed that then, I believe it now, and I always will.